Karen filmed my pregnant wife crying. She didn't know I was a federal prosecutor. I prosecuted mobsters, corrupt city councilmen, and cyber criminals hiding behind screens. But I never thought the case that would break me emotionally, morally, would begin with a crying woman and a woman holding a phone like it was a badge. That woman crying on the curb was my wife, 8 months pregnant, barefoot, sobbing uncontrollably in front of our new home. The woman filming her was named Karen Elsbeth Drury, and the vest she wore read HOA Compliance Enforcer. But there was no HOA. There was just Karen. And this is how I turned her fake authority into real federal charges. We moved to Stonebridge Heights 3 weeks before everything imploded. A small, clean-cut Virginia suburb, good schools, tree-lined sidewalks. My job at the Eastern District Courthouse kept me busy, and my wife Elise, who'd just taken maternity leave, needed somewhere quieter to rest. The neighborhood looked like a dream. It wasn't. Karen introduced herself the day after we moved in, clipboard in hand. Laminated guidelines in a plastic folder. "I'm head of the HOA Compliance Board," she said. "We take pride in Stonebridge appearances." She never smiled. Not really. She welcomed us by pointing out that our trash bins were 3 inches off the sidewalk line. Elise brushed it off. I wanted to confront her, but I had bigger things on my plate. Trials, deadlines, and Elise needed peace more than confrontation. We didn't know then what she was capable of. We didn't know she had a history. 3 weeks in, Elise set a few planters near the porch. That same afternoon, a neon orange slip was taped to our front door, warning unauthorized aesthetic additions. Violation of Section 8C, subject to review and fine. I checked the county records that night. There was no active HOA in Stonebridge Heights. It had legally disbanded in 2016. Karen was acting on her own, and yet neighbors listened to her. Some feared her. Others quietly resented her, but stayed silent. "I think they're just used to it," Elise said. "She scares people, or embarrasses them." Elise didn't scare easy, but the pregnancy had made her more vulnerable, and I knew she felt it. So I did what any prosecutor might do. I documented, screenshotted, photographed, researched. Karen had no license, no board, no legal title, but she had power because she was loud, because she threatened, because people believed her threats had teeth, and because no one had stopped her. Yet, the morning everything changed. Elise decided to put up a small wind chime on the porch, a gift from her sister. It barely made a sound. She smiled when she saw it sway. She went inside to rest. 2 hours later, she stepped out to find the entire pot arrangement shattered, smashed into the walkway, the wind chime gone. Karen stood on the sidewalk, holding a phone, filming. "You were warned," she said. "Don't pretend to cry now." Elise's voice cracked. "I'm not crying for you. I'm crying because I'm exhausted, because I'm pregnant, and because this is my home." Karen kept filming. "You want sympathy? Then follow the rules like everyone else." That's when I arrived. I stepped out of the car and saw Elise barefoot, shaking, mascara running, and Karen filming with a grin. "What are you doing?" I barked. Karen turned the phone on me. "You should be asking her what she's doing, bringing urban clutter to this neighborhood." My jaw clenched. I pulled out my federal ID and badge. "I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Malcolm Reed, and if you don't stop harassing my pregnant wife, I'll show you exactly what due process looks like." Her face dropped. Elise whimpered, and Karen for the first time lowered the phone. But it was already too late, because I had seen enough. I've stared down cartel lawyers with blood on their hands. But the moment I looked into Karen Drury's eyes, saw her smirking at my wife's tears, I realized something chilling. This wasn't about bylaws. It was about control. She wanted to humiliate Elise, and she'd nearly succeeded until I reminded her the law wasn't on her side. The moment she saw my badge, her whole body shifted. Her voice got smaller. Her arms crossed over her chest. But the camera didn't lie, and now I had her on it. That night, I didn't sleep. Elise had cried herself hoarse. She kept replaying it in her head, the crash of her pots, The sting of being filmed like she was some kind of criminal. Our baby, our son, was coming in 4 weeks. He deserved better than this. I opened my laptop, and I began the kind of investigation I usually reserve for corrupt mayors and Medicare fraud. Karen Drury had no business calling herself HOA anything. The real HOA Stonebridge Heights Residential Association was dissolved in 2016 after a dispute with the county over mismanaged funds. A few neighbors tried to restart it in 2019, but failed to get quorum. Karen had never held any official position. She created something called Stonebridge Compliance Guild, a fake civic authority registered as a community development trust, a legal gray area that looked official but held no enforcement power, no board, no elections, no accountability. Just one woman, a laser printer, and a stack of blank violation slips. She used stock seals, fake stamps, created violations that cited non-existent subsections. And for years, people had paid her. I walked the block the next morning, casually, clipboard in hand. I knocked on 12 doors. 10 people opened. Every single one had a story. She said my mailbox was 2 inches too high, made me pay $75. She warned me that if I didn't trim my hedges, I'd be reported to county compliance. I panicked and hired someone. She told me I couldn't have a pride flag, said it violated neutrality standards. A few neighbors looked down as they spoke, embarrassed, angry at themselves for believing her. But what they described was classic coercion, bullying through paperwork. They showed me printouts, Karen's logo, her citations, her payment slips. She'd created a fictional bureaucracy and convinced half the neighborhood it was real. Elise stood beside me that night in our kitchen as I laid everything out on the table, literally. She built a shadow government. I said, no oversight, no limits. She made herself judge and jury. Elise touched her belly. I feel like she stole something from me. She did. And we're going to take it back. I wasn't acting as a federal prosecutor yet. This wasn't a formal case, but I knew how these things worked. Intimidation, fraud, emotional harassment with fabricated legal weight. The next morning, I printed one of Karen's violation slips and filed it under federal review as a pattern of fraud complaint, and I made my own flyer. Know your rights. There is no active HOA in Stonebridge Heights. Any enforcement by the so-called Compliance Guild is not legally binding. If you've received a fine, demand proof. Do not pay unregulated dues. You are protected under VA Code 55-1-1800. I posted 10 copies. By noon, 5 were torn down. By evening, I saw Karen filming herself at the end of the street, standing beside her SUV and announcing a neighborhood smear campaign. She called me a government stooge with an axe to grind. Elise watched the video and said, I don't care if she's delusional. She's dangerous. And then our doorbell rang. It was Rosa, mid-70s, Filipino-American, lived 2 houses down. Her hands trembled as she spoke. She threatened to report my son, said he was squatting because he didn't mow the lawn while I was in the hospital. He's autistic. He was just overwhelmed. My jaw clenched. Elise sat Rosa down, brought her tea. I opened my case log and officially started drafting affidavits. I was done waiting for karma. It was time to file it myself. That night, I received an email from a blocked sender. The federal government doesn't scare me. You can't stop the will of the people. If your wife can't handle real communities, maybe you should move back to Surrey. Attached was a blurry screenshot of Elise, crying on the curb. Karen had uploaded the footage to a private Facebook group. Caption, another whiner who can't follow the rules. That was it. I forwarded it to my contact at the Virginia Office of the Attorney General. The subject line, criminal pattern of harassment, fraudulent civic entity, Stonebridge Heights. By week's end, I had 6 neighbors signed to testify. 2 had proof of payments. 1 had video of Karen placing a warning slip on her door at 2 a.m. And then came the twist. An anonymous neighbor forwarded me a screenshot from Karen's Dropbox folder, shared accidentally in a group email. It included a spreadsheet labeled Compliance Revenue 2022, a list of flagged houses marked messy or high risk. and a document called Escalation Protocol, Tier 3. Tier 3 said for residents who challenge guild authority, record and shame publicly, leverage neighborhood rumors, initiate code violation blitz 3+ notices, suggest referral to county enforcement even if not filed. It wasn't just fake, it was calculated. And Elise, she was listed as Tier 3, high. That night, I sent everything to the Office of Civil Rights and to the U.S. Attorney's Office for my district. And the final straw, Karen issued a neighborhood-wide mandatory HOA meeting flyer, complete with threats of property liens for non-attendance. That's when I made my final move. Karen Jury called it a mandatory compliance assembly. She printed the flyers on heavy cardstock, sealed them in faux official envelopes, and hand-delivered each one. The language was textbook intimidation. Failure to attend will result in citation and HOA review. Any attempt to disrupt order will be documented and responded to accordingly. All residents subject to Stonebridge Compliance Guild rules as outlined in Section 6, Article 14. There was no Section 6. There was no Article 14. There was no HOA. But Karen didn't care about truth, she cared about control. And she believed in her fantasy enough to try to make it real. So we let her. Elise wanted to come, but she was exhausted physically and emotionally. We were down to the last 2 weeks of her pregnancy, and I wasn't risking a stress-induced early labor for the sake of a fake neighborhood tyrant. "I want to see her get crushed," Elise said through clenched teeth, her belly taut as she lay on the couch. "You will, I promised." From the front row. The meeting was held in the Community Recreation Center, ironically the only thing still legally tied to the long-defunct HOA. Karen stood at the front like she was at a press conference. Clipboard, branded vest. A banner strung across the folding table read, "Stonebridge Compliance Guild, Preserving Community Excellence." About 30 residents showed up. Half looked nervous. A few were curious, but most were quietly furious. I stood in the back with 3 others neighbors who joined our growing coalition. Rosa, Terrence, a quiet military vet, who Karen once cited for aggressive yard signage, and Brenda, a school counselor. Karen accused of educational subversion for putting up a "We Believe in Science" window sticker. We'd rehearsed this. We had folders, timelines, witnesses, and a surprise. Karen began with a speech. "Too many newcomers think they can ignore the culture and order that makes Stonebridge safe. We've seen an uptick in clutter, unsanctioned changes, and defiance of standards. We must protect our streets before they become unrecognizable." Then she turned toward the audience and said, "Before we begin official citation review, I'd like to address one resident directly, Mr. Reed." Heads turned. I smiled. Didn't flinch. "Mr. Reed has taken it upon himself to challenge the order we've built here. He believes because of his government connections, he can ignore the rules we all follow, but no one, pregnant wife or not, is above the guidelines. That was her mistake, because as she pointed toward me, my contact from the State Attorney General's office walked in the door, followed by 2 investigators from the Federal Housing Compliance Division. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't need to. They just walked to the front and handed her a packet. Karen's voice faltered. "What is this, Miss Drury? You're being served with a cease and desist order regarding fraudulent civic enforcement, misrepresentation of housing authority, and harassment under disability protection statutes." Gasps echoed. Karen looked at me. "You set me up." "No," I said. "You set yourself up. I just pressed record." The packet included proof of her shell entity's registration and financial transactions, screenshots of her private Dropbox planning violation blitzes, resident affidavits alleging coercion, emotional harm, and monetary fraud, video of her filming Elise while calling her a threat to neighborhood quality, a list of all false citations issued using made-up bylaws, confirmation that no HOA existed, and that her use of terms like mandatory dues and property liens violated state and federal law. Then came the twist we hadn't told anyone. Karen's ex-husband, Daniel, had reached out to me. He was the one who'd anonymously leaked the Dropbox, and he joined us in the back of the room that night. When I motioned, he stepped forward. Karen forged my name on original documents for her shell organization. he said. I never signed any of it. I've kept the originals. She's been lying for years. That shattered whatever illusion remained. A woman in the third row stood and said, she fined me for having a wheelchair ramp. Said it was aesthetic pollution. Another added, she told my 9-year-old son to go back to your country because he chalked the sidewalk. The room erupted not in chaos, but in clarity. The spell was broken. Karen's voice grew shrill. You're all just jealous I've kept this place clean. I made this community safe. But there was no safety in fear. The AG representative stepped forward and said, Miss Drury, we're recommending formal investigation. You're ordered to cease all operations of the so-called Stonebridge Compliance Guild, effective immediately. She dropped the clipboard. Outside the building, reporters were already gathering. Word had spread fast somehow. Someone had leaked the video of Karen confronting Elise. It had hit 700,000 views on Twitter in under 2 days. Fake HOA Karen, chapter pregnant, not property, chapter justice. For Elise. Elise watched the news report from home. I walked in and found her crying again, but this time, it wasn't out of fear. They believed me, she whispered. More than that, I said, they believed each other. That night, the Stonebridge community chat exploded. Residents who had stayed silent before now shared their experiences. There were dozens of stories. Each one carried shame, guilt, and finally relief. And it wasn't just Karen who'd been exposed. It was the deeper truth: fear thrives in silence. But truth, it grows loud. By Monday morning, the fake empire Karen built was collapsing faster than it had taken her to print her first violation. The cease and desist order had teeth. State agents froze her shell entity's account within 48 hours. Residents who had paid guild dues were instructed to submit restitution claims through the new local task force. Meanwhile, I watched the neighborhood begin to change in real time. It started with the signs. Every remaining compliance zone placard, those laminated threats she'd zip-tied to trees and light posts, was taken down by hand. Not vandalized, not burned, just quietly, methodically removed. The message was clear. We're done being policed by a lie. Karen went silent online. Her private Facebook group, Stonebridge Residents for Order, was archived, but the damage she'd done echoed. People were unpacking trauma they didn't know they'd buried. One neighbor posted, she told me my son couldn't play outside because he had ADHD, that it disrupted the tone of the block. I paid her $200 to leave us alone. Another wrote, she said if I put up Christmas lights before December 1st, I'd be cited for seasonal pollution. I thought it was real, and someone else. I've never felt so relieved and ashamed at the same time. Elise saw the posts. She scrolled through them slowly one night, eyes brimming. She made people feel less than, she said, and they paid for it literally. I nodded. She built her power out of silence. You broke it by crying out loud. Elise smirked. You mean sobbing on the curb? I kissed her hand. That sob was the loudest truth this street ever heard. A week after the town meeting, we held a public listening session in the rec center. This time we called it. Over 60 residents came. We opened the mic. No formal speakers. Just stories. Anger. Gratitude. Apologies. People who had once called each other names: compliance freak, troublemaker. Karen's target stood side by side and shared the space. Rosa stood up first. I'm 74. I've lived in Stonebridge longer than Karen, but when she told me my rose bushes were unauthorized growth, I doubted myself. I let her shame me. She wiped her glasses. Never again. Terrence stood next. She fined me for flying a Black Lives Matter flag, said it made us look political. I was too tired to fight back. Now I know I'm not alone. The crowd clapped, and then Elise surprised me. She wheeled herself to the mic, now in the third trimester, and temporarily using a chair due to swelling. She looked like a force of nature. I'm the woman Karen filmed crying on the sidewalk, she said. I thought that was my worst day here, but it turned out to be the start of something better. She looked around. I'm proud of this neighborhood, not because it's perfect, but because it learned how to listen to its own pain. The next day, the Commonwealth filed official charges against Karen Drury fraudulent impersonation of a legal authority, civil harassment under disability protections, operating an unlicensed business for public enforcement, coercive fraud involving financial loss of vulnerable persons, false threats of property seizure. Her arraignment was set for the following month. She pled not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. She'd left a paper trail miles long, emails, receipts, recorded threats. And the Dropbox folder, the one her ex-husband leaked, was the nail in the coffin. I testified to the state investigator's office alongside 10 neighbors. It felt strange, being on the other side of the table. Usually I'm the one asking the questions. Now I was the witness, and I answered with pride. Because this wasn't just about me. It was about a neighborhood that remembered what it meant to protect each other. On Elise's due date, something remarkable happened. Rosa, Terrence, and Brenda organized a volunteer group to repaint the curb and sidewalk outside our home, the same place where Karen had stood and filmed Elise like she was a spectacle. They painted the curb gold, not yellow. Gold, Brenda explained, because this block, it's earned. They also installed a flower box, identical to the one Karen had smashed, and filled it with pink and blue wildflowers. A small wooden sign was planted beside it. This space once held shame. Now it holds love. That night, Elise went into labor. 12 hours later, we welcomed our son, Caleb Elijah Reed, into the world. A nurse at the hospital showed Elise the news on her phone during recovery. Karen Drury had been indicted on all charges. Bail was denied. Elise looked down at Caleb. He's coming home to a better place. That weekend, the neighbors held a quiet celebration, not for Karen's arrest, but for our son's birth. They brought homemade food, cards, a hand-stitched baby blanket. Rosa played old jazz on a portable speaker while kids ran in the grass. It wasn't just a party, it was a neighborhood reborn. In the weeks that followed, a legal precedent was drafted at the state level, the Stonebridge Clause, a protection prohibiting any unregulated enforcement body from issuing property fines, threats, or citations without transparent, documented authority, and I helped write it. We still have the wind chime. It hangs quietly on the porch again, swaying in the breeze. Karen once said it didn't belong, but it does, because it sings softly now, not out of defiance, but because it wasn't silenced, and neither were we. Karen Drury sat in the courtroom wearing the same smugness she always wore, shoulders tight, hair stiff, expression flat. But this time, there was no clipboard, no vest, no fake title to hide behind, just a defendant's nameplate and the eyes of a community she once ruled by fear. The trial lasted 6 days. The state called 15 witnesses. I was the fifth. I took the stand in my federal capacity but kept my testimony personal. I told them about the day I found my wife 8 months pregnant, crying on the curb while Karen filmed her. I described the fake citations, the harassment disguised as neighborhood order, and the so-called Stonebridge Compliance Guild. But the moment that gripped the courtroom wasn't mine. It was Elise's. She walked slowly to the witness box, newborn Caleb, just a week old, swaddled in Rosa's arms nearby. Elise still carried the fatigue of labor, but her voice was clear. She didn't just harass me, she said. She tried to turn a neighborhood into a weapon, and she used my body, my pregnancy, my pain as ammunition. Karen's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. Let her finish. Elise continued. I don't want revenge. I want acknowledgement. That I wasn't hysterical, that my pain wasn't a performance, that crying isn't weakness, it's the sound of someone refusing to be silenced. The jury didn't move, didn't blink, but I saw something shift in their posture. Because Elise wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for every neighbor who'd been fined, shamed, threatened, or broken under Karen's false authority. Then came the evidence. Emails signed HOA Enforcement Chairwoman, screenshots of fake citations, threatening liens, spreadsheets of payment records, the Dropbox folder, complete with Tier 3 targets and escalation strategies. Her lawyer tried to claim community initiative and misunderstood leadership. But her actions told a different story, a pattern, a system, a calculated manipulation of fear. The verdict came in under 2 hours. Guilty on all charges: fraud, impersonation, harassment, emotional coercion, and attempted extortion under color of law. The judge issued the sentence the same day: 6 years in federal prison, 128,000 in restitution to be paid into a community fund, permanent ban from holding any neighborhood governance role nationwide, and court-mandated public acknowledgement and apology to all plaintiffs, including Elise. Karen stood as the judge read the ruling, lips pressed thin. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. But that didn't matter anymore, because the gavel came down, and with it, her illusion of power shattered. The next week, the restitution fund opened. Elise and I refused payment. Instead, we asked the state to redirect our share to a new initiative: the Caleb Fund, a micro-grant program for accessibility projects in underserved communities. The name spread fast. Within a month, over 200 applications came in from across the state: wheelchair ramps, elevators in mobile homes, noise-canceling sensory kits for autistic kids. Karen's punishment became something beautiful, something restorative. Back home, Stonebridge Heights looked different, not in the grass or siding, but in the way people looked at each other. Walls had come down. Conversations replaced complaint slips. People waved again, and the ramp Elise once feared to step down became a gathering spot. Neighbors left notes at the flower box. "Thank you for speaking up. Because of you." I told my story too. "We see you." On Caleb's first birthday, we held a block party. Everyone came. Rosa brought homemade lumpia. Wallace grilled. Brenda brought her therapy dog for the neighborhood kids. Elise stood by the ramp, holding Caleb in one arm, a glass of iced tea in the other. "I was afraid to come here," she told me. "Now I don't want to leave." "You won't have to," I said. "Not anymore." Karen's house was sold at auction. The buyer, a couple with a son in a wheelchair. They asked if they could keep the wind chime. Elise said yes. They added one of their own. I still prosecute big cases: white-collar crime, corruption, systemic fraud. But nothing has ever felt more personal than this street, this ramp, this family. Because justice doesn't always look like a courtroom. Sometimes it looks like neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder. Sometimes it sounds like a wind chime that used to be silent. Elise once told me she'd never forget how Karen made her feel exposed, humiliated, small. But she also said something else. She didn't break me. She revealed me. And I learned I'm not fragile. I'm fireproof. And now, every time we step outside, I hear that fire in the voices of those who used to be silent. Because the ramp that Karen tried to erase, it became a stage for truth. And on that stage, we all found our voice. What does justice look like in your neighborhood? Have you ever witnessed power abused behind fake authority or false rules? Share your experience, and let's talk about what it means to protect not just property, but dignity